Welcome, folks, back to Contrary to Popular Wrestling. I'm Carmine the Spirito, along with James Southard, and today we have a quite entertaining show. A little something different, a lot of fun this week. First off, we're going to interview Evan Ginzburg, the associate producer of 350 Days, and also from The Wrestler. James, that's your favorite documentary, isn't it?
Indeed, 350 Days. It was the greatest wrestling documentary I've ever seen. I put it above Beyond the Mat. It was so great. I got to see it the first day it came out, and I'm really excited to talk to Evan about 350 Days. It should be a really great conversation.
And also, we're going to have one of the greatest writers, in my opinion, in all of wrestling, Greg Oliver. He's an interesting story. It involves Bret Hart, and we're going to get into that. I feel it's a quite controversial story, and it's been out there for a while, but I didn't think that enough people talked about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to delve more into the Greg Oliver, Bret Hart controversy. And then, not to be outdone, we're going to have Ross Hart and Bob Johnson. I know you're asking, who is Bob Johnson? Of course, we know Ross Hart, member of the Hart family, but who is Bob Johnson? Well, we're going to find that out. He's got some great stories involving some very interesting characters. I think we're going to have a great time with him.
It'll be great to get to talk to Bob. You've told me some of his stories off the air, so it'll be a pleasure to finally talk to him. But Carmine, before we jump right into the show, we got an email. We've got some corrections to make. We were corrected, both of us actually. Last week, somebody pointed out that I was going down the list of people trained by Eddie Sharkey, and I said the Barbarian. You know what's wrong when I said the Barbarian.
Nord. You knew it was John Nord, right?
Yes, I meant John Nord.
It's not the Barbarian with Fatu.
No, what kind of jabroni do you think I am?
John Nord, the Viking with the boots.
Yes, and Huss.
John Nord.
Huss. Yes, John Nord. So,
not to be confused with Nails. Right, the Berserker.
Yes, that was my fault. And then you were corrected. Apparently,
right. Like if you had a kid's birthday party and you wanted to hire a Bruiser Brody lookalike, you would hire the Berserker. And what else? What other mistakes did we make?
Apparently, the Hodge building on the Oklahoma State Capitol grounds is not named after Danny Hodge. It's
not named after Danny Hodge.
No, it is named after Oliver Hodge, a former state superintendent.
Big deal. You know why they didn't put his first name is? Because nobody knows who he is. Everybody assumes it's Danny. You know what? I think I'm going to go there tonight with some spray paint. We're going to correct this situation. Ollie Hodge. Who the hell did he ever beat?
If anybody would like to donate bail money to the podcast to help bail Carmine out.
What's right is right. I mean, you know, Ollie Hodge. Come on, stop it. Danny Hodge put this town on the map, baby. Put Oklahoma City on the map when it comes to wrestling. The last star to come out of Oklahoma, in my opinion. It's only been 70 years.
You could argue Swagger, but he didn't start here, so.
No. And I guess, well, do you firmly believe that? You believe that Hodge is the biggest star to come out of Oklahoma? Would you say that? Would you put that down on paper?
I would say so. I mean, he was a two-sport athlete. You know, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. How many pro wrestlers have been on the cover of Sports Illustrated? One.
He was a great boxer, too.
Oh, yeah, two-sport athlete. He was incredible.
Hodge wrestled our guests from the other week, Eddie Sharkey. Those two had some unbelievable battles at the Oklahoma City Coliseum here. So you think he was the biggest star?
He was the biggest.
Okay, well, you're going to have a lot of hate letters from fans of Dr. Death Steve Williams. Huh? But you forgot about Dr. Death.
Hold on. Dr. Death wasn't from here, though. He was from Colorado. He just happened to go to school at the University of Oklahoma.
Oh, very good. Let's move on to the show, shall we?
All right, let's kick things off with Evan Ginzburg.
Welcome to Contrary to Popular Wrestling, my dear friend Evan Ginzburg.
Hey, it's great to be back, and before we do anything, I just want to compliment you on that Kamala tribute you guys did. It was really beautiful and heartfelt, and R.I.P. Kamala.
Well, thank you. Well, he meant a lot to a lot of people, and I'm really happy that we were able to do it, and grateful, and we're just tickled pink. Everybody loved it so much, right, James?
Yes, we are. It was a great episode. episode, and I'm really glad to have you back, Evan. We had a great time with you on our first episode talking wrestling culture, but now we got you back to talk about a really great movie that you were a major part of. No, not The Wrestler, but we'll talk about that as well. But 350 Days. It was a great documentary. I went and saw it when it first came out, and it instantly became my favorite wrestling documentary. You know, people don't realize you have a lot of background in film, starting with The Wrestler, and you were even doing documentaries before that, like Wrestling Then and Now. How did you get into documentary making?
What's interesting in life, one thing always leads into another. I was doing a newsletter back in the primitive pre-internet days, Wrestling Then and Now, which led to that documentary. And being involved in newsletters and documentaries led me to radio, which led me to being an agent with various wrestlers like Johnny Valiant and Nikolai and many other legends. And because of that, I was contacted by the Wrestler team, and ultimately I was hired because I had the contacts in wrestling with various promoters and legends and such. So what happened was The Wrestler came out in 2008, and years later, Darren Antola, not Darren Aronofsky, Darren Antola, the executive producer of 350 Days, pitched me this film. And at the beginning, I was very resistant because I just said to myself, you can't top The Wrestler. You know, nothing's going to top The Wrestler. But the guy was so passionate about it, and I could see it was from the heart. He's a blue-collar guy. He's not some, Hollywood bigwig. He loved 80s wrestling like we all did. These guys were his heroes, and he wanted to document it and do it right. From there, once I agreed to being associate producer on 350 Days, we met with an editor whose name is Michael Burlingame, and this is interesting. He worked with Paul McCartney, Mariah Carey, John Cougar Mellencamp, Sting, not from WCW, from the Police, etc., so on, and he knew nothing about wrestling. And I said to Darren Antola, the executive producer, I said, this is the right guy. This guy, he doesn't know the main event guys from the mid-card guys, from the Carpenters, whatever the case may be. He had no idea. This guy, I said to him, I said, Mike, make a movie that would make an 80-year-old woman who never watched wrestling cry. I said, that's the movie we want. This is not a shoot interview. This isn't who was the booker in Chattanooga in 1972. There's enough shoot interviews in the world where you point a camera at a guy's head for 2 hours. I said, make a movie. Yeah, I said, make a movie that's going to move people, and that's exactly what he did.
And so you mentioned that you were contacted about 350 Days not long after The Wrestler came out. And
well, actually, it was several years after, and I had turned down other wrestling-related projects, including something on Chris Benoit. I said, I'm not going near that, okay? And I just didn't think doing another wrestling film would really add to my resume because, Mickey Rourke won Best Actor at the Golden Globes, and he was up for Best Actor at the Oscars, and, we were at the Lincoln Center, New York Film Festival, 2,300 seats sold out, and I said, you're just not going to top this. But when Darren came to me and just poured his guts out, Darren Antola, that we're going to do something special with this, he sold me, and I'm happy I did it when the smoke cleared because we're very proud of this film.
And you did put a lot of work into that, I'm sure, because most people don't realize that making a movie like 350 Days of The Wrestler is not a couple of week or a couple of month process. You guys took some time and put some serious work into both of those movies.
The Wrestler, from the time I met with Darren Aronofsky and the team to the time it was finished, was 7 years. There were 5 or 6 script rewrites. And what people don't understand about film is the business end of it is very complex. Every piece of footage, every photograph, every single thing has to be legal and legit. And, there's so many levels to making a movie. People have no idea. So The Wrestler was 7 years. 350 Days took 6 years. If you look at 350 Days closely, There's a dozen or so legends in there that are gone. They're gone now. That's how long it took to make this movie. Off the top of my head, Don Fargo, the Wolfman, Nikolai, George Steele, one after another. These guys are no longer Larry Sharp. They're no longer with us. Superfly Snooker, of course. I mean, there's a dozen guys in there. We're just so happy that we captured them on film. Some of them, it was their very last appearance. Don Leo Jonathan, the Wolfman. You know, these guys weren't making tons of movies, you know, so we got them on film, and it's there forever, and they're pouring their hearts out.
And there are some really big names on that. Superstar Billy Graham, Bret Hart, Greg Valentine, people like that. So was that the majority of the time, was just going to them and collecting these interviews?
Well, some of these interviews were in Canada. Some of these interviews were down south. Some of these interviews were more local. You know, we came to these guys. They didn't come to us. It was a big undertaking, and every time you do it, you know, you had to set up a film crew and get on planes, trains, automobiles, and get out to them. And, you know, sometimes it was 1,000 miles away. Sometimes it was in your backyard. I mean, it was quite an undertaking. We had about 90 hours of footage when the smoke cleared, because wow. You know, you're talking to a guy for an hour and a half, whatever. The editor, again, Michael Burlingame, whittled that down to an hour 50. And that's actually long for a documentary. People don't realize that either. So 90 hours became an hour 50. It's quite an undertaking, any film, especially if you're going to make the effort to make it special and do it right.
You said you spent an hour and a half, sometimes even more, with these guys. You know, one of my favorite scenes is watching Ox Baker sing and cook in his kitchen. You know, I'm sure you had some very fun interviews during that time. Do you have a personal favorite out of all of those characters you met?
People keep telling me that Ox Baker stole the movie. I mean, one person after another. They go, Ox Baker stole it. And the other side of it is, at some point, as producers, we kind of have to decide, how are we promoting this? And Bret Hart and Billy Graham, we basically labeled as the stars. Why? Because Billy Graham is so charismatic, he could read the phone book and it would be, you know, dynamic. And Bret Hart, it's almost like yin and yang. Bret Hart is very soft-spoken, introspective, and really opens up like he's on a psychiatrist's chair. I mean, the guy really opened up. So when we're promoting it, we're always like, Bret Hart stars in 350 days, Superstar Graham stars in 350 days. But all these guys were great. Tito and Greg and J.J. Dillon and Lanny Poffo. I don't want to bore your audience with a laundry list, but there's 36 or so legends in this film.
But there's nobody like Ox.
Yeah, Ox stole it. I mean, the guy, he's funny, you know, he's charismatic, larger than life.
He just takes over a room.
Exactly.
And he can't help himself.
Exactly.
He was at the Cauliflower Alley, and they were doing an auction. And, you know, can we get, whatever, $25 for this? And he said, come on, let's get this thing over with. $50, I'll take it, come on. Ox was just unbelievable. From, I got the old time wrestling blues. How about that? That was really a big hit for him. I loved it.
Ox was larger than life, and he was a movie star. He was in I Like to Hurt People, Escape from New York, other films. Johnny Valiant used to say to me, the wrestlers are much more charismatic than the movie stars. Johnny Valiant was an actor. He was on The Sopranos and various other projects. And he would say, you put a baseball cap on Al Pacino, he walks down the street, nobody notices him. Ox Baker walked down the street, everybody noticed him. You know? My father was a New York City taxi driver. He said to me back in the 60s and 70s, the only people that stopped traffic in New York were Muhammad Ali, Julie Newmar, who had like the greatest body ever, and superstar Billy Graham. He said superstar Billy Graham would stop traffic in New York.
Incredible. James, do we have anybody like that today that could stop traffic?
Absolutely not. I mean, Ox Baker is just an example of one of those characters that wrestling just doesn't have anymore. There's not many of those exuberant personalities. There's not many guys with bright red painted toenails that sing opera in the shower, you know, and that's one of the things that I think is important that you guys did really well, is capturing the voices of those guys that are no longer with us, the Don Leo Jonathans, the Ox Bakers, people like that. We need to preserve their stories or they'll just be lost forever, and I think that's the magic of 350 days. You hear the same stories you've heard before, and then you hear new stories that are forever preserved on film in 350 days.
And I also want to point out the director, Fulvio Cesare, he was not a wrestling guy either. And I think that was part of the magic of all of this, because when you go into a shoot interview or whatnot, you're kind of like looking for those details, discussing those angles, discussing the booker. We were not looking to do any of that with this project. We were looking to move people. And I think when the smoke cleared, the film accomplished it.
It really did. You capture the beauty of what they did, and at the same time captured the deep sadness and strain that it put on their lives. It was by far the most moving wrestling documentary. It wasn't just a day in the life. It was an overall look at what these guys went through, the good and the bad. It was a yin and yang type of documentary.
For those who don't know, 350 Days refers to guys like Ric Flair, Harley Race. When they were NWA champions, they were on the road 350 days. Bret Hart said he was on the road 336 days. Greg Valentine said to me he was on the road 320 days. So this isn't some, exaggeration. These guys were not home, and this film is about the toll that took on their marriages, their relationships with their kids, their bodies, their psyches. It's sex, drugs, rock and roll, but the toll that takes on you year after year after year. You guys know, you saw some of these guys early 80s and you saw some of these guys late 80s. They had slowed down. I mean, this was not an easy lifestyle.
It really isn't, and I think, sex, drugs, and rock and roll is one of the best comparisons you could make. Really, that's what this movie reminded me of. I've seen tons of great rock and roll documentaries, covering the Stones and Led Zeppelin or Woodstock and things like that. At the same time, they show that kind of dark side. It's not just glamorous, and we have a tendency with wrestling documentaries to go one way or the other. Show either just the dark side, like shows like Dark Side of the Ring, or just the glamorous highlights of it. And what really made 350 Days great was it encapsulated both. You didn't leave going, man, it was just such a tragic life, or wow, they were great. It gives you a full inside perspective of what it was like to be a wrestler in those heydays of the 70s and 80s.
And it shows you the guilt that some of them had. I cheated on my wife. I wasn't there for my kid's birthday, graduation. Think about Survivor Series and Starrcade. When was that? Thanksgiving and Christmas. These guys were away Thanksgiving and Christmas. Wendy Richter's in the movie. She said, I couldn't have a baby. Where was I supposed to put the baby? On the ring apron while I wrestled? They really, really sacrificed for their art, for their fans. There's a segment in the film where they break down their injuries, and Stan Hansen and Bret Hart, they're like pointing to various parts of their body, like everything's been broken, everything's been damaged. And wrestlers have told me I'm always in pain, always. They really sacrificed to entertain us, and you don't get a sense of that when you watch it on TV today. But when you see this film, these guys, wrestlers say, we have a bump card. There's only so many bumps on our bump card, and at some point the hip goes, or some other joint goes, or your back goes, and it's quite a sacrifice they made for us. I'm glad they were open with the 350 Days crew and really just poured their hearts out. I think you would really have to be cold-blooded not to be moved by some of the things they say in this film.
It's very endearing, very, very passionate. I love the film a great deal. I think that it's a story that needed to be told. I don't think your average person knows the life or the lives of what these guys went through. And you did a fantastic job, and not enough can be said about that, Evan.
Thank you so much. We're very proud of it. And let me just say one thing. This is an independent film. This is done on a shoestring. So, guys like yourselves who promote it and get behind it, we really appreciate it. This isn't WWE films. These are a couple of blue-collar guys who believed in something and put their heart, soul, money into it and, sacrificed to do this. We appreciate that it's gotten great reviews and we have worldwide distribution. Our distributor, Gravitas, has it pretty much everywhere, which is great, but it's still tough. They're There's a lot of wrestling content out there. So, when guys like yourselves get behind it, we're very grateful.
Well, everybody can see it on Amazon Prime, correct?
Yes, Amazon Prime. You could get the DVDs, the Blu-rays, any major cable system. You can rent it. It's on iTunes. It's everywhere. You could just punch in 350daysthemovie.com or come to our Facebook page and follow us. It's easy to find. Just punch in 350daysthemovie.com or go on Amazon, and it's there. Vudu, it's pretty much everywhere. It's not on Netflix for whatever reason, but it's pretty much everywhere else.
I encourage everybody to check it out. James, it's one of your favorite films, isn't it?
I can't recommend it highly enough. I tell everybody that has even just a casual interest in pro wrestling, you have to see it. I used to say that about things like Beyond the Mat, but the moment I saw 350 Days, I knew this was the definitive pro wrestling documentary, and I cannot wreck it high.
Wow. Can we quote you on that?
Please,
we can put that in the
go
ad.
ahead.
That's nice. Thank you.
Please, go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I would be honored. As I said, I cannot recommend it highly enough. I recommend it to everybody. It's so worth it. Whether you rent it, whether you buy it, I own it. It's something, it's like a pilgrimage. It's like Mecca. You need to watch it at least once in your life.
And many of the people that came to our movie theaters and screenings, a lot of them were not wrestling fans and appreciated it. A good documentary, I've seen documentaries on coal mining and, things I had no real interest in, but a good documentary will capture you. So for the wives and the girlfriends and people who aren't necessarily wrestling fans, I think they'd enjoy it also.
Well, a little bit of trivia for you, Evan, and I've been waiting to have you on to bring this up for you. You being the associate producer of The Wrestler, I bet you don't know that I had a contribution to that film.
Remind me, it was 12 years ago.
No, you wouldn't know. No, you wouldn't know at all. But actually, you remember when Necro Butcher was staple gunning dollar bills to himself?
I sure.
They did a bit about it during the Oscars with a staple gun and a dollar bill. Okay, for a moment in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I promoted some death matches, and the guys were using dollar bills that they were taking from the fans and stapling it to each other. And I said, what the hell? What's the purpose here? I don't understand the end game. I said, let's make a match out of it. So I made a match where they had to staple the best out of $13 bills to each other to win the match. I hope Cornette doesn't hear this.
Yeah. Cornette didn't like the wrestler.
And so I invented the match, the Lucky 13 staple gun match. Yeah, I coined that phrase.
Wow.
I just wanted to make sure that was in the history books, and everybody has that jotted down, that I can be attributed to the Lucky 13 match.
That's awesome. You guys have 30 seconds? I'll tell you a funny Necro Butcher story with the wrestler.
We have more than that, Evan.
Oh, okay. We have an appointment with Necro Butcher to come down to Aronofsky's studio in Brooklyn. We're waiting. He's late, okay? The guy's like two and a half hours late. So I'm looking up his contact information, and I make a phone call. I reach his mother, Necro Butcher's mother, and the mother's like, where's my boy? You got me worried now. Here's a guy with staples, dollar bills to his head, and his mom is worried. Where's my little boy, okay? So finally he shows up, and, history was made. I mean, the guy was great in it, but true story. Necro Butcher's real name is Dylan, by the way.
Yeah,
like the poet.
Right.
Good guy.
He's a super, super nice guy.
Yeah.
Our next guest coming up, Evan, is going to be Greg Oliver. Are you familiar with Greg?
Yeah, I know Greg. Greg's from
Great
Slam
writer.
Wrestling.
Yeah, great writer, Slam Wrestling. Now, years ago, he wrote a book, The Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, about the Canadians, featuring all Canadian wrestlers, and listed all of the wrestlers in order according to, who he thought was the best. And he rated Bret Hart as number 14.
Yeah.
We're going to talk to him in just a moment, and I'm going to bring up wrestlers 1 through 13 because I want to see if he can justify it.
Well, I would put Don Leo Jonathan at the top of any list. Wasn't Ivan Koloff from Canada originally?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I mean, guys like this, top 10, top 20 guys on any list. So let me just say something about these lists. I mean, they're always very subjective, and when you have a young person do it, and Killer Kowalski's like number 50 greatest heel behind The Miz. I go, this is absurd. Okay,
Sure.
so list our list. And first of all, when you hear the word greatest, what does that mean? Is it the greatest technician? Is it the greatest draw? Is it the greatest charisma? You know, there were guys with tremendous charisma who were not, quote unquote, great wrestlers, great technical wrestlers, but they were great. I mean, I think Abdullah Butch is great. You know, the guy stabbing the guy in the head.
Right.
You follow my logic? So it's all subjective.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Greg Oliver is a really intelligent guy, an intellectual, I dare say. It's going to be interesting. I want to get inside his head. He's outspoken. I know he's got reasonings for everything, and it's going to be interesting having him on. It's kind of a controversial topic, and it really hasn't been brought up. So we're going to have some fun with Greg Oliver in just a moment. I just want to thank you, Evan, for being on once again. Thank you so much. It's just great.
Anytime.
Really,
My pleasure.
You are a tribute to the business with all the passion that you put into it, and thank you once again for being on, and it definitely will not be the last time.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime, guys. Thank you so much for your support. I enjoy the show. I listen every week, seriously.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
And I think Evan Ginzburg has most certainly earned the title of friend of the podcast. We're very glad to have him back on this week, and you already went ahead and introduced our next guest, Carmine, so without further ado, let's throw it over to Greg Oliver.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest, some have called him a charlatan for some of the things that he's done. I've called him my favorite heel, my favorite wrestling writer. He's written some of my favorite wrestling books of all time. And even though he is a Canadian, I still call him my friend, Greg Oliver. Welcome.
That's quite the introduction, man. I don't know what to
still
say.
Here, you or me. So I'm letting the people decide on their own.
Okay, fair enough. Good to hear you.
Now, I jokingly, of course, refer to you as a charlatan, of course.
Well, it's a good word. It's
is.
a word not everybody knows, so, let's throw around the big words.
Well, you're an intellectual. I have to pick up my game if I have you here on the air.
Okay, that works.
You're a smart feller, Greg.
I try.
How many books have you written or co-written?
16.
How many of them wrestling?
There's 7 wrestling books, and then the John Arezzi memoir comes out next spring of 2021, so that'll make 8 wrestling books, and then I've signed on to do a book with Lufisto, who's a woman wrestler out of Montreal, who's really well known. She's sort of the mama bear of the wrestling industry, the women's wrestling industry, so I got a couple more in the works, let's put it that way.
Well, I've loved all of them. Now, one of my favorites is your Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series that you did on tag teams, heels, I believe was another category, and the Canadians. Was there a fourth?
There's 2 more, yeah. There's Heroes and Icons, which was the biggest of the bunch, which is a really monstrous 540 pages, I think. And then the one that just came out last August is called the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Storytellers. Steve Johnson and I really poured our hearts into that one and really examined how storytelling changed through the years and really what it is today. And it has Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho on the cover, and talk to Kenny Omega about his philosophy about storytelling. So it really brings you from the days of athletic carnival wrestling right up to AEW. So it was a great project to work on, and we're quite proud of that one.
I'm ashamed that I haven't read it yet. I really am.
Well, you would have bought it at the Cauliflower Alley Club.
There you go. I would have. Shall I just wait until April of next year?
Well, that's hoping we can cross the border. That's not a given. So
yeah, right. We don't even know that yet. Let's talk about the Canadians, that edition of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. I was in Iowa that glorious day at the International Wrestling Hall of Fame.
It wasn't a Dan Gable Hall of Fame at that point. Grego says Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame is what we call it.
In Waterloo, Iowa. And I was
where
there.
Where the NWA was formed. Got a lot of history there. And Thunderbolt Patterson's from Waterloo, Iowa, too. So, there's a lot going for it.
Right. I believe Gotch even wrestled there a few times.
For sure.
Yes, I believe so. And I was sitting there at a banquet table. It's a small banquet. Back then they were small, and maybe 150, maybe 200 people tops, I would say. And up on the dais are many luminaries. There's Roddy Piper and Bret Hart. And we're just about getting ready for everything to get going here. There's an awards presentation and everything. And I was sitting next to a friend of mine from Milwaukee, really looking forward to this great evening. And early on in the ceremonies, Bret Hart stands up. What exactly did he say? You remember him verbatim? What did he say initially?
You're misremembering things, Carmine. I know that's a first, but
that's the reason why I'm having you on here.
Yeah, I know what you're trying to do, and that's all right. You warned me at least. The short version is that Steven Johnson and I had done our 3 different books. We'd done the Heels, Tag Teams, and the Canadians in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame series. And the Tragos Says Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame there, that's part of the Greater International Wrestling Museum in Iowa, had presented us with the James C. Melby Award for Wrestling Journalism. And we got that in the afternoon. And that was a great, great moment for both of us. I actually remember when they called, I said, no, I don't think I should get an award, because I was 37, I think, at the time. And I called Steve Johnson, who's older than me. He goes, Greg, anytime you're 50 and they want to give you an award, you got to take it. So I got that award on his behalf, is the way I look at it. He wasn't quite 50 at that time. He was just about there. So we got our award in the afternoon. It was a good moment. We weren't getting our award at the banquet that night. However, that afternoon, we gave away some copies of the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, The Heels, including one to Bret Hart, who I wrote on the inside, your favorite heel is on page, whatever it was, 240, who's Archie the Stomper Gouldy, which was his favorite heel of all time, which he's written about many times and he said many times. So that all leads up to the evening when there were many awards being given out. This is during the award ceremony. We had our dinner and we were all sitting there and they'd started the awards, and he was accepting an award on behalf of his father, Stu Hart, who was being inducted into the Tragos Thesz Hall of Fame, which tries to recognize how amateur wrestling and professional wrestling can be made into a different kind of art form than the showy guys, like your Killer Kowalski's, as great a performer as he is, nobody would ever say he had a technical background, the way a Bret Hart did, the way a Kurt Hennig did for a couple of recent names, as well as, your Lou Theszes and your Danny Hodges and all those kind of names from the past. So Stu Hart was being honored and Bret was inducting him. And he talked about a life in pro wrestling and what it all meant. Then he segued into lambasting me, and yet not Steven Johnson. Steve Johnson was sitting there with his wife, and I was there with my father. My dad certainly didn't know what was going on. But Bret Hart said, Greg Oliver writes these books on wrestling. It's all made up. It's not the truth. It's just baloney. I wrote a book that took 7 years. I gave everything I had to write about some of the deepest tragedies, the truth about my life as a wrestler. For someone like this that sits there in this room with me to say that in his website that my truth is not the truth, it's just wrong for me to be in the same room as these people. They don't honor the truth of wrestling. So at some point when it's all happening here, Steve and his wife Cindy left. And I respect that. It's his decision. But I sat there. So later, the rest of it goes, I'm going to step aside now. And I just want to say it's not right for me to be in the same room as people who don't do honor and justice my profession. You either have a choice of leaving or I will.
That's it. That was the moment.
Not transcribed. Okay, so then he goes, then it makes me laugh that Greg Oliver here rated me behind Skylo Low as I think the 13th greatest Canadian wrestler. I have news for him. He's wrong. Skylo Low was a much better wrestler than me, but he's only half the man that I was. So there, he took a cheap shot at Skylo Low. So you wanted the word charlatan. So when you write about wrestling, you talk about wrestling, especially when you're among these kind of people, you owe it to tell the truth. If you want to come here and be a charlatan, well, you're in the wrong place, because this is a room filled with legends and people that paid their dues in wrestling. Take your sorry-ass lies about wrestling and how you made it up and save your books, because they're not the truth. This room is filled with truth. Thank you. I'm talking to you, Greg Oliver. Either you go or I go. Do you remember what I did?
Go ahead.
You don't remember what I did?
Oh, you got up and waved.
Well, no, I sat there and waved, but I just sort of did a little queenly wave, nice and slow. Bye. And so Bret goes, Greg Oliver's going to stay. I'm going to my room. And then he leaves the room. And there's honestly silence in the room.
It was so awesome. It was a magical moment, actually, to see him get up and walk out and you just sitting there and just waving, just beaming ear to ear. It was incredible.
I was not beaming. Let's be realistic.
You sure?
I was freaked out.
You weren't smiling? I think you were smiling. Sure you were smiling.
I didn't know what the hell was going on. Nobody did. It was so bizarre. What are you going to do, right? The guy's had strokes. He's had all kinds of issues. I'm a forgiving person. I never had a problem with Bret Hart.
Right. You just rated him number 14, that's all.
Well, I remember talking to Gene Kiniski, and I said, Gene, I've got you ranked the 6th best Canadian wrestler of all time. And I don't know if you've ever met Gene over the years, but he's kind of a gruff guy. And he starts doing his kind of thing. I said, Gene, can I tell you who's ahead of you? So I did. Whipper Billy Watson, Yvonne Robert, Killer Kowalski, Mad Dog of Fashawn, and Earl McCready. And Gene Kiniski, there's sort of just silence on the other end. He goes, I'm okay with that. So you have to respect the history. You have to respect how things happen. Would I rank them the same today? Maybe not. That's not really the point of all this. The point is that it was not the time and the place to do it. That's my biggest problem with it.
Today?
Well, for one, our rule was, and it always has been with these, is that if you were an active wrestler, you wouldn't get ranked in our top 20. So in a book on Canadians, does Edge make a top 20? Probably. I remember thinking Chris Benoit would probably be in there, but now, of course, Chris Benoit is not going to be in the top 20. You know, Jericho deserves mention, but he's not even done wrestling. So, yeah, it has to be a different book today than it would be back then, and that's just the nature of the business, right? It keeps evolving. It keeps changing. You know, Bret was good in his time. If you tried to put Bret from 1994 in the ring today with these guys, he'd look strangely out of place.
Their rankings, though, are based upon their overall achievements in the business?
Everything. Their importance to Canadian wrestling, their amount of press they got, everything. Well, Whipper was our iconic figure, right? So Whipper Billy Watson was, you know, like the Gorgeous George up here. And in fact, it shows the fundamental difference between Canada and the U.S. Our first major wrestling star was a goody-goody who had a Whipper Watson safety club for kids to stay safe. And then your first star was Gorgeous George, this primping prima donna who strutted around the ring. That's the fundamental difference between the Canada and the U.S. right there in pro wrestling.
There's a lot of other fundamental differences that we're not going to get into here today.
I respect that. Let's stick to what we need to stick to.
Oh, I kid. Okay, back to Bret Hart. You ranked him at number 14. Now, ranked at number 13 was his favorite wrestler, Stomper Gouldy.
Yeah, his dad was ahead of him, a Roddy Piper, Abdul the Butcher.
John and Chris Hollis were 12. Now, why were John and Chris together in that? Were they because of their impact as a team in Canada?
Yeah, there's a lot of that I decided to do. Again, would I do it the same today? Probably not. But, you know, also the Sharp brothers are in there. Ben and Mike Sharp are in there as a team. They're, I can't remember, 15. But the fact is that they were massive stars in Japan. They were the first real Gaijin tag team to make it big in Japan. So, again, it's a timing thing. You know, when you talk Skylar Low and Little Beaver, well, they wrestled for the Queen of England. You know, she requested it. So, you know, there's...
number nine.
There you go. And again, they were the first major stars in Japan that were Gaijin, and they happened to be Canadian. You know, they were living in San Francisco at the time, and that's how they got the gig. But it's a great story. Fascinating guys, too.
Skylar Low and Little Beaver, 8 and 8.5. That was cute.
Yeah, that was a gimmick, yeah.
But those guys are fantastic, but they're in a category of their own as far as I'm concerned. My God. I mean, there will never be another midget wrestler. I don't see any great prospects for midget wrestling in the future. Not like those guys.
You're right. Well, and there'll never be a whole circuit where they can wrestle like it was back then with dozens. And the amount of travel they did and all that, it's like mad respect. We talk about the WWF lifestyle of the 1980s. Well, those midget wrestlers and those women wrestlers, they went so far. I mean, their cars just got totally worn down. So much driving. And all of them crammed in there. Again, the times change, right? Flying is exhausting too. But flying is exhausting in a different way than taking a car everywhere. And the baloney blowouts are exactly what they talked about, weren't they? Like, you know, there was nowhere to get food. So you stopped, you got a pound of bologna and a loaf of bread with some mustard.
Right.
Exactly.
That's right.
And that's what you had.
You just got me thinking about midget wrestling. We really have seen the death of midget wrestling. There is nobody like Little Brooke or Little Tokyo or Skylar Low, Little Beaver. I mean, the art of midget wrestling has been completely lost. It's really because midgets, they wanted to work like your regular size guys on the show. They're doing the same spots that they're doing, and I don't know how that's supposed to get over. But
that's
those guys
that Mexican influence, isn't it, though? Like, that's what really happened in Mexico, and that translated into here.
Yes.
Like, they had the little representations, right? So you had the little, can't even remember all the names offhand, but yeah, little mascarita, right?
Right.
And they were modeled on the bigger wrestlers, and that's how it progressed, and they were supposed to do the same moves as the big wrestlers, and that sort of got imported here.
Isn't that something? Let's talk about who else we have on the list. Well, of course, Roddy. You have to put Roddy there. Roddy, you put at number 7.
Look at the guys in front. You have to. Like, it's tough to get them in there, right? Roddy Piper was a key figure.
So just comparing the two, Bret Hart and Roddy Piper. Why would Roddy be up 7 pegs on the totem pole higher than Bret?
Well, I don't know. Would I do it the same like today? I don't know. But the fact is that Roddy Piper certainly had more of a name within the general population than Bret Hart ever did.
Yeah.
Despite what Bret Hart may ever think. He does think he's the greatest thing. You know, his whole idea of Survivor Series, I can't lose in Canada and stuff. I'm not sure you could have found, you know, you walk down the streets of Montreal that anybody would have cared, other than those 20,000 people that were in the stand.
Bret has a photo of himself in every room of his house, I understand.
I did not get the full tour when I was there in 97.
Is that right? You didn't? You know who we're going to have on? We're going to have on Bob Johnson. Our friend from
Allow some
Calgary.
time for those stories.
Yes, well, he's going to tell the legendary Bobby Heenan story. It's floored me every time. Are you familiar with the story?
I'm not. I guess I'll have to tune in. Don't
Oh, you're going to have to tune in for that one. Thanks again, man, for being on.
Can I just say, related to going to Bret's house, right?
Yes.
We went there in 97. I did a live chat. Well, what we called a live chat at the time, right? Technology has changed. But, you know, we were doing a live chat from his house after he'd left the company, WWF, and this was for all of Sun Media across Canada. It was a really big deal. We crashed the servers basically for the first time. It was a huge... Remember, the internet's pretty new still in 1997. So Bret and I knew each other really well. And we had the tribute to Canadians at the Cauliflower Alley Club, you know, which I hosted with Scott D'Amore. He could have mentioned that instead of ambushing somebody unexpectedly at one of the moments of my life.
Like that. Right.
Exactly. There were other moments it could have been done, and that's sort of the most disappointing thing. I have no problem with him having a problem with me. I used to be in the Bret Hart fan club. I have the card upstairs. He was one of my favorite wrestlers growing up.
You think it was because Roddy was there sitting next to him?
Maybe that empowered him.
Think
sure.
that has something to do with it?
He definitely worshipped the ground that Roddy walked on. I think there's no question about it. If anything, he wished he could have been as outspoken as Roddy and as successful in Hollywood. Like, not that Roddy was a big star.
That's true. Well, Roddy had that charisma that made Roddy Piper. There'll never be one. I was thinking the other day, who could you possibly cast in a movie to play him? Ooh, tough. Maybe a young Kurt Russell, maybe, but I don't know, you know. Really tough one there, right?
Yeah, whereas Chris Hemsworth playing Hulk Hogan, I can sort of buy that, right? That's the one that's in process now, I think. You know, but Hulk had charisma of a different sort than Roddy did, right? Roddy had a magic about him, and Hulk had a presence. And I think there's a bit of a difference there.
Very, very true. What a great way to put it.
Indeed. Go ahead and plug where people can get your books, where they can find you, all of that. Let folks know where they can read the incredible writings of Greg Oliver.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys. It was fun reliving some of those things. It's not something I talk a ton about because, you know, it's in the past. And I don't think it really serves a lot to go around bragging about it, but it was certainly an interesting moment in my life. I still run...
talked about enough.
Fair enough. I run the Slam Wrestling website, slamwrestling.net. I've been at that for, too long. Since 1996 we started. So we've been doing this a long time. And before that, I actually did a newsletter when I was a teenager called the Canadian Wrestling Report. And all my books can be found at oliverbooks.ca. There's links to go to Amazon, or if you can drop me an email if you really want a book, we can figure out shipping. But it's tough to beat the online retailers for price. However, I will say it's not necessarily true in a pandemic, but in general terms, you can go to just about any bookstore and say, hey, I'd really like this book. Chances are they'll order it for you, and maybe a couple more from the same author or the same publisher. So it really does help authors if you go to your local bookstores and support them as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we hope to have you back very, very soon. And who knows, maybe by then the Maple Leafs might have brought home the cup. We can only hope.
Well, since our last happened in 1967, the year my wife was born, I'm not sure what will happen. I think the world will collapse if the Leafs ever do win. It's certainly been interesting having so much hockey here in town and the Leafs not playing.
Indeed.
Thank you for being on, Greg.
All right, thanks, boys. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Our main event here on Contrary to Popular Wrestling this week, we are being joined by two folks calling in from lovely Calgary, Alberta, Canada. We are joined on the line right now by Bob Johnson and Ross Hart.
Hey, guys.
Gentlemen, welcome to Contrary to Popular Wrestling.
Great to be on the show. I heard it's outstanding podcast.
Earlier in the show, we had a fellow Canadian, Greg Oliver, on.
Oh, Greg, did you slam him?
Ross, welcome to my podcast, man. It's just a blast to have you on.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a blast to be on, Carmine and James.
So we had Greg on, and the one main reason why I wanted Greg on was because I wanted to talk about his book that he wrote, that Hall of Fame series, the one that he did on the Canadians, and he ranked Bret at number 14.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into it with him on it, and he said actually if it was today, he would probably do the rankings differently. But he made some good cases for his decisions, of who he ranked. I mean, he ranked Skylo Low and Little Beaver above your brother.
Yeah, and I don't want to interrupt you. They are legends, Skylo Low and Little Beaver. They're probably the two most elite classic midgets of all time. But why would you compare midgets to professional wrestlers? I could see if Greg wanted to make a list of the top 50 wrestlers, but he shouldn't be ranking them on any basis. He has no criteria to be ranking them according to athletic abilities, box office, best interviews. It's like comparing apples to oranges. So to me, Greg really had no basis to be even writing a book on the top 50 and listing them in order from 1 to 50 or 1 to 100. He could make a list, arguably, of the top wrestlers, but he shouldn't be ranking them. And of course, it's very subjective. Greg was a wrestler.
All of it is subjective.
At best, he was a later historian in the business, and I honestly don't know how much background he has of wrestlers from the 50s or 60s, So to me, that's what makes his whole book very implausible, even though he, put a lot of time and effort into it, and, he's certainly in his opinion, but who is he to be rating or ranking anybody, and I wouldn't have the right to rank wrestlers. My opinion is very subjective, but especially midgets and professional, or contemporary wrestlers,
I find it always so difficult when anybody asks me, who is my favorite of all time? It's so difficult. Who is the best? Who do I feel is the best worker? Who do I find to be the most entertaining? I don't know. There's so many different categories for me. So
many different criteria, absolutely.
So much, and it's all very personal and very, very subjective. James, wouldn't you agree?
Yes.
It's almost impossible to give a definitive ranking. It's not like baseball or hockey where you can look at statistics and decide who the best person is. We don't have that in wrestling. There's no way to quantify and say this guy was good, this guy was bad. There's no way to do that.
Right.
Especially when the styles have changed and the way wrestlers performed in the 50s or 60s is totally different from the 21st century,
One thing that I respect about you, Ross, is that you're very outspoken about things. And I really appreciate your opinion. I love the guy. I really do. I think Greg is a hell of a guy, and he has a great passion for the business. And I think his heart is in the right place. So I respect him a great deal. What I alluded to earlier was the banquet in Iowa, of which your brother was there next to Roddy Piper. Yeah. And it was basically, Bret said, essentially, called him a charlatan and said how, I don't know, verbatim, pretty much, you leave or I leave. And Greg, I give him, again, a lot of respect for a man that have conviction, stand by his words. He just waved, and he said he didn't smile, but I kind of imagine him beaming from ear to ear. I don't know, but maybe not. It was an amusing moment, Ross. It was an amusing moment.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty hilarious, actually. So it probably helped Greg sell some more copies of his book, It probably gave his book a little more exposure, because people who hadn't read it maybe thought, gee, I have to buy this and see what all this controversy is about. But I certainly understand where Bret was coming from. It's unfortunate if that spoiled the ceremony for any other guests there or the organizers. I know Bret was speaking the way he felt, and I think he still feels that way about Bret.
And you have to respect that as well. Yeah. Everybody's opinions need to be respected. That's the problem with society nowadays. You disagree with somebody and then you're labeled a bad guy for an opinion. But that's not the reason why we're here today. Also joining us is Bob Johnson. Bob, say hello to the folks.
Great to see you, Carmine. Oh, by the way, thank you very much, Carmine. You've been on Heartbeat Radio, and we've had you on our show with Bruce Hart and myself. We've had you on a few times, and we have Carmine who's always sending in questions.
Not me.
So it's not you, eh?
That's not the same Carmine?
It's tough to believe that there's more than one Carmine in Oklahoma City, but I can rest assure you it's not me.
Well, this guy, must be somebody ribbing, but anyway, we had this guy Carmine. He says when he was at the Cauliflower Alley Club and all this stuff, and one time
somebody took my identity. That's what happened.
I think we had Brian Blair on. I said I have a Facebook message, tweet or something from Carmine in Oklahoma City.
I don't tweet.
Brian Blair said, "Hey, my friend Carmine, he's a regular down at the Cauliflower Alley Club." Great question, Carmine. And so that's not you, eh?
No. It's not me at all. No,
so
it's not. Somebody's ripping. Carmine does not tweet.
I always thought, we got those tweets, and I thought, this Carmine's a real cool guy. He's a good friend of mine, and we had every week we'd have callers calling in, and every time I see the list, and I get like about 500 callers messages, and I always think I'll get that guy from Oklahoma City, Carmine, and always had really good questions. And I said, well, that's my friend Carmine.
You should ask him to be on the air.
Yeah.
Let's see how much he really knows about me.
Absolutely.
I hope the guy's not stalking you.
Yeah, it's probably just somebody with the same name, you know. I think it's just a coincidence.
Yeah. Cauliflower Alley? I don't know. That's kind of strange. Let's talk about the reason why we're here. First, Bob, tell us your history in the business. What have you done? You worked a lot in Calgary. I understand you helped promote some towns. Explain to everybody what you did in the legendary Territory Calgary Stampede.
In order to set that up, I'd like to give you a brief history how I even broke into business, if I could.
That'd be great.
And I'm from a place called Winnipeg, Manitoba. Winnipeg at one time was probably the greatest wrestling city in North America outside of Minneapolis or Chicago for AWA wrestling. They had various promotions went into Winnipeg starting in the 50s. They used to have the NWA. The Tunnies would come out of Toronto and they'd go to the Winnipeg Auditorium, and they'd go about every month they draw about 3,000 people. And then eventually they left Winnipeg and Vern Gagne kind of took over. The Winnipeg Auditorium actually closed down, and they had to use where the hockey team was, the Winnipeg Arena. Vern Gagne was coming in every 3 weeks and drawing 10,000 people every 3 weeks. So it became a really hotbed for wrestling. I was a young guy in Winnipeg, and the guy that lived a couple of doors down, a guy named Cy McAlpine, he was one of the...
What was that name again?
Cy McAlpine.
Okay.
And the main promoter in Winnipeg was a guy named Alex Turk. My dad knew Alex Turk, and I remember when I was a young kid, Alex Turk would get my dad and me tickets to the wrestling. I was just a young fan. So they had this hotel called the Marlborough Hotel in downtown Winnipeg. As I got of age to drink, I'd go down to the Marlborough Hotel, and I knew Alex Turk, and I knew Cy McAlpine, and they'd always invite me to come down to the Marlborough Hotel to see the boys. And I was a big fan at the time. And I remember drinking in the bar with Ray Stevens, Maurice Vachon, and Crusher, and guys like that, but way back in the early 60s or early 70s. Eventually, I befriended Jimmy Valiant, Johnny Valiant, and Bobby Heenan. And in those days at the AWA, Vern was really smart. He was like Stu Hart. You know, it was big kayfabe in those days. When the AWA came into Winnipeg or whatever town, the heels would always stay separate. You'd never see a baby face in the heel. You'd never see Jim Bronzell.
Or staying at the same hotel. They'd always stay at different places, right, Bob?
Yeah, and they were at the Marlborough Hotel, but they would stay. They put one group in the top floor and the other guys in the bottom floor, or a different hotel a lot of times. When they came in, many times they asked me to pick them up at the airport, come in, and both on the same flight, obviously, but you would never see them coming through the security at the same time. Major kayfabe. Anyway, I got to know all these heels, and I got to know Bobby Heenan. They used to call me up, invite me down to the Marlborough and go and drink and all that stuff. And remember one time I had a little grocery store in Winnipeg. I had just got over, I had a really serious illness and had this job they used to call me at the grocery store. And I remember Johnny Valiant called me up one night. He says, you know, Bob, no disrespect to the Marlborough Hotel, but it's kind of boring. Well, Winnipeg's a boring place anyway. So he says, Bobby Heenan and myself and Bobby Dumpkin and Jack Lanza wanted to know, we heard that you used to work in a hotel that had a strip bar in it. Are there any good stripper places? You know, we go back to the Marlborough Hotel. It's kind of boring, and you go in the bar and the heels are on one side and the babies on the other side. And I said, listen, I'll call this lady friend of mine up. I had a part-time job at this hotel called the Airport Hotel, and in the basement of the hotel there was a place called the Constellation Room. There was a lady named Gladys Balsley who she ran all the strippers in Winnipeg. So I called Gladys up and I said, listen, I've got some wrestlers want to come down. Wow, great, bring them down. So I took all the heels down to the Constellation Room, and it was a Thursday night that they come to Winnipeg, and usually they were pretty dead on the Thursday night at that strip place, but once Heenan and company came in, and it was a sellout that you couldn't, they were lined up to get into the Constellation Room. Oddly enough, Gladys Balsley, she was such a big fan, she started her own wrestling promotion eventually. I knew Bobby for for 2 or 3 years and liked to drink.
On and
with
off,
all
you saw him when he came to town?
Yeah, he called me up. There's a place called Grand Forks, North Dakota, and halfway between Minneapolis and Winnipeg. And I'd be in my store, and Bobby Heenan would call me up. Hey, Bob, Bobby here. We're driving up to Winnipeg. Let's get together tomorrow. Can we still go to that strip bar? They come in, and no problem. And I got to know them, and we had a lot of fun. And I was pretty much a fan. I knew what was going on, but I didn't ever ask much. But they were so darn nice to me. And I'm at my store one time, and it was right by the Winnipeg Arena. Every time they came in, they'd stop by the store and get their mix or smokes or cigars or whatever they were going to get. So I remember Bobby Heenan came in one time and he says, do you work here every day? I said, yeah, every day is my store. And he said, Bob, why don't you come on the road with us one time? So, well, I got to run my store. I arranged to have somebody work on a Friday, and I got on Frontier Airlines with the boys and flew down to Denver to the McNichol Sports Arena the next night. We're walking into the McNichol Sports Arena. There's Jimmy and Johnny and Bobby Duncan and all the heels coming in, and there's Bobby Heenan and me are side by side. At the old McNichol Sports Arena in Denver, they had all the marks, and my fans were all behind this great big fence. A couple of years earlier, I lost all my teeth. I had some radiation from a really bad thing called Hodgkin's disease, but I got better. So I lost all my teeth, So I'm walking through with Bobby Heenan, and some guy yells out to Bobby Heenan, hey, Heenan, who's that guy with you? And Bobby kind of nudged me. He says, take your teeth out and growl at the guy. So I pulled my dentures out, and I showed my gums, and I growled at the fan. It was a good time. Went back to the hotel. It was next night I flew over to Minneapolis. Actually went over to Burton's office. They actually said, we're going to try to get you on as a referee. You're Canadian, but we'll figure that out somehow, and we'd love to have you join us and help us down here, and we'll get you as a job as a referee. So
you've been hanging out with Bobby on and off here, right?
Yeah, I've been hanging out with him for 2 or 3 years, and Jimmy Valiant, and it's funny, guys like Jimmy Valiant and Lanza. And I was in New York City a couple of years ago, WrestleMania, and I'm going to the WrestleCon, and I hear some guy yell out, Bob Johnson. And I said, I don't know anybody in New York City. Turn around, it's Jimmy Valiant. Jimmy comes up, gives me a great big hug. My brother, Bob, my brother. I'm walking through the MGM one time at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and I hear this guy yelling out my name, Bob Johnson. And here's Jimmy Valiant. Bob, my brother. Another big hug. So several guys like Paul, the Butcher Vachon, I knew him and always saw him at Cauliflower, and he remembered me, and Maurice Vachon remembered me, and Jim Brunzell remembered me, and even Jack Lanza. I used to see Jack Lanza at all the WWE events in Winnipeg, and he was an agent, and he, Bob, my man, how are you doing? How's it going, brother? And they always call you brother, and stuff like that. And anyway,
I think a buzzer should go off every time the word brother is said at the Cauliflower Alley. That's just my opinion.
1975, I guess, is the last time I saw Bobby Heenan in Winnipeg, and I had left to go to Calgary in 76, and I eventually joined the Hart family, but I had a job as a manager of a theater down there, and we had a show one night called Paradise Alley, a movie with Sylvester Stallone and Terry Funk, and it was a wrestling movie.
Love it. One of my favorites.
Yeah, so anyway, those days there was no DVDs or video cassettes or anything. Videos were just sort of coming out. I had told the manager at the theater that I was involved a little bit with the wrestling in Winnipeg, and he says, listen, we have a guy, he's a big promoter of Stampede Wrestling called Stu Hart, and maybe we can do a promotion on Paradise Alley. So one thing led to another. I went out and met Stu, and I met all his sons, and I got to meet Ross and Bruce and Smitty and Brett and everybody, Owen, and it became an instant friendship, and I eventually went to work for Stu, booking all his spot shows. This is in the 80s. Go ahead, about 10 years later, I'm down at the Cauliflower Alley Club. I see Bobby Heenan down there. So I walk up to Bobby Heenan. Bobby, how's it going, my man? Who are you? I don't know you. I said, remember Denver when I took my teeth out? Well, I don't know what you're talking about. I had never met you in my life. I said, you don't have to work me. And I had already been working for Stu for 10 years, so I knew all the inside stuff. And I said, buddy, you're working me. Don't have to work me, And he says, I've never been to Winnipeg. I don't know. What hotel? The Marlborough Hotel? I don't. The strippers? I said, what? Don't you remember going to strip? I don't know. I don't watch strippers and stuff like that. Anyway, that's at the Cauliflower Club. I said, okay, well, that's fine. He wants the part of the rib. That's a lot of guys used to love ribbing guys. I don't know if they do that anymore, but anyway. Now go ahead. The next year, I go to Cauliflower Alley Club again. Bobby Heenan, how's it going, brother? who are you? I said, I met you last year at the Cauliflower Alley Club. And then I know you from Winnipeg. And I don't know you. I've never met you in my life. And all this bullshit. So anyway. So now, I said, okay, well, that's okay. I don't care. I just...
It must have been the cologne you were wearing or something, Bob.
It must have been. I don't know.
Maybe he didn't recognize you. You had your teeth in.
Yeah, I had them. Yeah, but anyway...
Maybe that's it.
Surely he could recognize my voice or something. But anyway, go ahead a few years later, and I go down to the WrestleMania. The Hart family were all invited down to the WrestleMania, and they were honoring Stu.
Is that the one in Phoenix?
In Phoenix, yeah. So I said, listen, I wouldn't mind joining you. I ended up paying my own airfare, but I get down to Phoenix, and I know Bruce Ross, we had 2 or 3 rooms, so I shared a room with everybody, and I ended up getting a ticket to the whole works. They treated me like $1 million. But anyway, we're at this place called the Wyndham Hotel, and the only people who were allowed in that hotel, you had to be with WWE. They didn't have any public or anything in there. So I'm waiting at the elevator one time, and lo and behold, my old friend Bobby Heenan comes up with his wife. Bobby, how's it going? Bob Johnson. Who are you? I don't know you. I never met you in my life. And I said, he said, don't you remember the Cauliflower Alley Club? What's the Cauliflower Alley Club? I said, well, I met you there, unless it was a different Bobby Heenan. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never been to the Las Vegas to the Cauliflower Alley Club. So the doors open in the elevator, walk in, and there's Bobby Heenan and his wife and me, and silence. And about 10 seconds later, I said, Bobby, great to see you, man. And is this your wife here? And who the hell is this? I have no idea who you are. So I'm leaving the elevator, and remember, his wife said, Bobby, that man knows you. He's such a nice man. He knows you. How come you didn't say hello to him? And Bobby says, hell if I know who he is. Go ahead a few more years back at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and I'm sitting in the buffet, and I got a really good picture of Bobby Heenan giving the finger to everybody in this picture. I said, Bobby
he
Heenan.
wasn't doing well at that point.
No, I said, Bobby, I hope things are working. I hope you're going to get better or something like that. And he comes up, so I walk up to him, and he says, Bob Johnson, man, I worked you for 25 years. And he says, I remember you. You fell for that rib it was a 25-year rib. I loved it. He shook my hand. And
brilliant.
So that was
brilliant. It was only until he couldn't contain it anymore. He was diminished there in the wheelchair. Now, when he talked to you, was he talking through his wife? Because his wife could understand everything that he was saying. It was amazing. You guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, he was sitting with his wife at the buffet there. Didn't talk a lot, but he and I talked. Bob Johnson, what a great rib. But he knew me when I went up there. That was one of the great, pretty good story, old Bobby Heenan and I, and then he passed away. But
you know what that means? You're talking about Bobby Heenan. You're talking about our Don Rickles of wrestling, essentially. You're talking about a giant here. He's showing how much he loves you. That's what they always say. In the business back in the day, as we all know, he used to rib the young guys. Hopefully, the young guys that you liked, not the ones that you were trying to scare away or get rid of. That's how I look at it anyway. He was really showing you like, hey man, I think you're awesome. That's a great story.
Yeah, Bobby was a really cool guy. I remember always so darn nice to me and back in Winnipeg. You'd think that could only happen once to one person in his lifetime, but lo and behold, that kind of leads me into another similar story that I had at Owen Hart's funeral in 1999. They had the service, and then they went out to the graveside, and then we all came over to Stu Hart's house. Stu Hart got a great big house out here in Calgary. It's got a yard that you could probably...
That's where the dungeon was.
Yeah, the dungeon was in there. He's got a lot of land there, and you could have hundreds of people. But I remember WWE came in, and they had every major person, WWE and Vince, and I'm in the lobby of Stu Hart's house. I'm just kind of standing there, and I look around, and I see Luna Vachon, and I mentioned to her Paul Vachon, and one thing led to another. She says, oh, here, I'll introduce you to a couple of friends of mine here. So I turn around, and this is Paul, and the other one was, I can't remember their real name, but Triple H and China. Hunter's there, and we're just talking like you and I are talking right now, and Hunter says, listen, can you tell me, is there such a place as a dungeon? or is that like an urban legend? I said, what do you mean an urban legend? Hunter, hey, come on down. So I take Hunter and China and Luna Vachon into the basement of Stu Hart's house. We spent about 10 minutes in the dungeon. I showed them all around the dungeon. The dungeon was an interesting place. They had like a super low ceiling, and they had this one pipe that you couldn't do any spots. So
it was pretty low clearance. It was only
low clearance,
about, 7 or 8 feet clearance.
Yeah, it's just a mat, and there's no ring, no
ropes, no turnbuckles. It was just a mat, and then there was a floor where there were some free weights, and guys could sit and watch. My dad would work out with guys, but yeah.
Sometimes they'd throw a guy across, bump him off the wall, and then the guy'd forget to duck, and then he hit his head against the water pipe or something.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so that was that happened.
You got all these guys like getting hard weight on it.
Oh yeah. And they forget that there's a pipe there, and then I took them on a tour of the house. Stu had about 20 bedrooms in that place. It was a great big house. So we spent another half hour, took them through the entire house. So fine and dandy that, hey man, I really appreciate this. And Hunter was so nice, man. What a professional, and so nice to me. Thank you. He kept calling me Mr. Johnson. I said, no, just call me Bob. A lot of respect, anyway.
Respect.
And I said, Paul, anytime, And so that's fine and dandy. About a year later, I'm at the Saddle Dome. I'm in the back with Stu Hart. Hunter comes up, and I said, hey, Paul, how's it going? Hey, man, how's it going? You're the guy who showed me the dungeon. I really appreciate that. That was really cool. And China liked it, and I think Luna Vachon, she said Luna liked it, and he took us on the tour of the house, and it was really cool. And what a nice gesture,
It's a fond memory for him.
Yeah, so that would have been in about 2000. I saw him, and then go ahead. I'm down at the WrestleMania with the Hart family. They invited me to come down.
Well, of course, the Hart family loves you. You're an adopted member of the family.
Anyway, I got there about 4 days early, and I remember sitting around drinking with everybody in the lobby. And in fact, Seamus, I'll segue before I tell you about Hunter, my old friend Seamus. He had just broken in, and I saw him in a movie that he did, and he was just a raw rookie in WWE. And Harry and TJ Wilson, Tyson Kidd were in there. And I remember I got in a nice conversation. I said, I saw you in this movie. And he says, Mr. Johnson. They always like to call me Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, I'm Seamus, and thank you very much. A couple of days later, I'm in the lobby talking with a couple of the agents that I knew. And I see Hunter comes in. I guess he must have had maybe too many things on his mind, and he had a little bit of amnesia that day because, hey, Hunter, how's it going? I said, Paul. I call him Paul, and he says, who are you? He said, I never met you in my life. I said, shit, this is a deja vu. This is Bobby Heenan again.
Maybe Bobby Heenan told him about the rib he was pulling on you.
Yeah.
And then that would be brilliant. And Triple H was now carrying over the rib. Yeah, that's brilliant.
That's sort of what...
Were you honestly thinking that maybe at the time?
Yeah, I thought, well, this is a deja vu. I said, they probably were talking about this. Right. Heenan probably told him that story anyway. I said, I don't know if you remember me from Calgary a few years back. I took you on a tour of Stu Hart's house at his funeral, and Hunter said, I've never been at Stu Hart's house, never been in the dungeon. I said, you don't have to work me, man. I'm in the business. You're working me. Is this a rib? You don't have to rib me. No, I don't know. I was never at Stu Hart's house, never at the service, nothing, And I said, okay, that's fine, and Danny, just let it go. Don't get mad at the guy. Later on, reminded a few of my friends within the company. I told them the story. I don't know if it ever got back to Hunter, but I don't know what happened. He had amnesia, or he had more in his mind. But I always found that really interesting in the business. I met so many guys over the years that knew me and remembered me, old legends. Why would they want to remember me? But let me quickly segue this Hunter story into, and you'll really appreciate this here. I want to tell you a real quick Hulk Hogan story. Bret was wrestling up in Edmonton, which is about 3 hours north of Calgary, and Stu wanted to go up, so Stu and I drove up to Edmonton. And as it happened, Bret wasn't even on the card. He was sick or something happened. He wasn't even on the card. But so we're in the dressing room. There's a big boss man, Slick, and Hulk Hogan. And Stu and I had actually had a program. What we used to do is I mentioned about my teeth flying. So anytime I was with Stu and we were up with one of the superstars, Stu would go into this thing where, hey, Bob, I got my friend Bob here. I want to show you a couple of holds, So he goes up to Hulk Hogan in the dressing room. Hulk, this is my friend Bob here. Let me show Bob. I'll show you. This is how Stu used to talk this way. So anyway, Stu Hart, he'd put me in a bear hug, or I put him in a bear hug, and then he'd take his chin and rub it against my cheek, and my dentures would go flying. And then I'm selling the hell out of this thing, and Stu would say, "Yeah, this is good exercise." Finally, I see Hulk Hogan standing there like in awe of this, and Stu said, "Hulk, I got a couple of good moves I want you to try in your match against Big Boss Man tonight." Big Boss Man, he was just like a stone. He didn't know how to react, and Slick was there.
He was stunned. He was stunned.
He was stunned, exactly. And so Hulk Hogan says, "Stu, I have to get the approval from Vince." He said, "Just go and surprise Vince. I got a couple of moves that Vince doesn't know." Stu had these great big hands, and wasn't that tall guy, but great big mitts. So
right.
Hulk, let me give me your arm. So he took his arm, and he had his arm behind his head, and you could see his hand come out the other side of his neck. And this is really good exercise, and try this on Big Boss Man tonight, and just surprise Vince. And meanwhile, Hulk Hogan is in total agony. This is good for you, and you could tell that he was. It was pretty funny anyway. Finally, Hulk had to get ready for his match. We were in there for about a half an hour talking to Hulk Hogan. Stu had him in every kind of hold. He had him down on the ground and try this thing with your leg, and try this, and Boss Man, try this. And, oh no, we gotta get approval from Vince. Can't do that. And but Stu kept rubbing it in. Don't tell Vince, just surprise him, About a year later, we're back in Calgary, in the Saddle Dome. Stu and I were very close. Greatest human being I ever met in my life was Stu Hart, and I'll say that publicly, the finest human being I've ever met on the planet. Stu and I were in the Saddle Dome, and in comes Hulk Hogan. At the time, Hulk was the world champion. He was the biggest name in wrestling, Stu goes up to him, "Hulk, I've got a couple of moves I want to show you here. I'll never forget this, Carmen, as long as I live." Hulk Hogan, the world champion, the biggest name in history of wrestling, said to Stu, "Stu, would you show those moves to Bob?" And I said, "How did Hulk Hogan remember my name?" So he remembered my name. Maybe Hunter didn't remember me, but Hulk Hogan sure remembered me from the year before. So that was kind of the irony to the whole thing with Hunter. I always put him over, but I've told that story to a few people about Hunter. But that's how it is. That could be, maybe that's a rip. That could be probably a rip. I'm sure that Bobby Heenan may have said, "Oh, this Bob Johnson guy, you'll rip him too," So that was just the nature of our business. I remember, I won't go long, but we were in the back at the Saddle Dome one time, and Kerry Von Erich was in the back. Bruce Hart was on the SummerSlam tour in the 90s, and Kerry Von Erich and Bruce were roommates for 6 weeks. Right, 6 weeks, every night, same match, same room, the whole works. I'm at the Saddle Dome, and there's Bruce Hart and myself, and we're walking, and we bump into Kerry Von Erich. Bruce Hart goes up to Kerry Von Erich and says, "Kerry, my man, how are you doing, my brother? I swear this happened. I saw it right in front of me." Kerry Von Erich says, "Who are you?" "I don't know you." And Bruce said, "Well, I thought you and I were roommates together in SummerSlam for 6 weeks." "I don't know. I can't remember. Do I know you? What's your name?" He says, "I'm Bruce Hart." "I'm sorry, I don't know you." So, hey, it happens to the best of us, Carmine. And it even happened to Bruce Hart. Bruce always tells that story about Kerry. But it's happened to, I've had a few. Most people I've met in the business acknowledge me, but that's fine. Bobby Heenan, that was a classic. And Bobby, he was a very cool person. And
that was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
I actually got along with him, and a good guy, and Jimmy and Johnny and Nick Bockwinkel was a good guy, but Mad Dog and Butcher and L. Casey and a few of those guys, they were pretty nice guys and treated me well. And even Hunter, he was really very, very professional when I met him at Stu Hart's house. Later, I called him Paul, and hey, thanks, man, and all that. But then I get to Phoenix, and I got the shock room. He said, "What the hell? Here we go again. Nothing changes in wrestling,
Here we go again.
Here we go again.
Bob, we're definitely going to have you back on. We're going to have Ross Hart back on. We'll have, hopefully, we can have Bruce on. I'm not sure if any of the other family members would like to come on, but I would love to do a podcast about the family, which I find to be so interesting. More interesting than the wrestling, the family itself. And not to get into the negatives and not to dwell on any negativity, but just to talk about the family that Stu built. So I'd like to have you back on for something like that, and hopefully you can help me organize some guests.
Sure, no problem. We could spend a whole show telling you about some of our ribs. We had a couple of guys who used to love ribbing, as Bill Kazmaier and the late great Brian Pillman. I think I told you that story of the land of rape and honey, and I'll tell that story too.
Yeah, we'll save that. Yeah, we'll do a show on Stu Hart's dynasty, and not necessarily talking about Calgary Stampede wrestling, but more so focusing on the family, which I find to be much more interesting and much more intriguing. Thanks again for being on, Bob. I really do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to come on here.
It was a lot of fun, Bob. Thank you very much.
And a huge thank you to Ross Hart and Bob Johnson for joining us. Those were some interesting stories. Bob Johnson, kind of a unsung hero, but definitely has some interesting
stories. Kind of like the Rodney Dangerfield of wrestling. I get no respect, you know? I love Bob. Bob is such a great guy, has such a passion for the wrestling business. You know, that's what we do here. We talk about some uplifting stories and stuff like that you haven't heard before. And it really is like a feel-good kind of show. And we had a little bit of controversy with Ross Hart and Greg Oliver, but I mean, I just think that just makes for a really good podcast.
It really does. It's always interesting getting both sides of the story, and we thank them so much, as well as Greg Oliver. He was a great guest. It's good getting to talk to Greg, as well as Evan Ginzburg, friend of the podcast. It was good to have him back on, and hope to have him back very, very soon. Carmine, got any closing thoughts before we start plugging our stuff?
I'm going to tell you what. We have so many irons in the fire right now. We have so many topics that we want to go forth with. I don't even know which one we should do next. So, folks, you got to sign up to our Facebook page to be notified of upcoming podcasts. But we do have some great stuff in store over the next couple weeks.
We do, and we want to hear from you if you have corrections, as we mentioned earlier in the show, or have topic ideas or questions for any of the guests we announced on our Facebook page. Feel free to send those to us at contrarypod@gmail.com, contrarypod@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, as Carmine mentioned, Contrary to Popular Wrestling. You can also subscribe and like our videos on YouTube. It does great things for us, and we can continue to bring more of this content to you. Be sure and follow us on all our social media channels to stay up to date, and we will see you all next week on Contrary to Popular Wrestling.